What I'd like to do today is to uh, talk about a very, very important text by Jung, the last chapter of his book Mysterium Conjunctionis, called The Conjunction. And this is the concluding seminar in this series, which began with an introduction asking the question, why was alchemy important to Jung? Why did he spend so much time on it? And again, that question will come up today in this seminar, and I will attempt to answer that once again at the end of this seminar. Why did Jung spend 25 years of intense study and work on the history of alchemy and so many of the alchemical texts and figures? In the second session, we talked about using alchemical images and concepts in Jungian psychology, and went through a number of the terms, and particularly the importance of the image of the alchemical vessel as a container for the process. Jung was convinced that the alchemists were engaged through projection in a deep psychological and spiritual process, moving through various stages, and we'll talk about those stages again today. In that seminar, we talked about the color symbolism, that the process begins with nigredo in the darkness, and then moves to albedo, the lightning and the enlightenment, and then finally to rubedo, the redness of the awareness and full consciousness of the depths of the experience that's been had in the process, and eventually toward a realization of the self. Jung began his studies and his work that would eventually result in this massive tome that he published in 1955. He started the work in the early 1940s, and there seem to have been two inspirations for this. Jung had begun his intensive engagement with alchemy about 10 years earlier, in the early 1930s. And as we saw in previous seminars, he created an index for himself with all the terms and terminologies and many quotations and excerpts. And then he would draw from this index and this 6-volume collection of resource material that he created for himself. He would draw from that in his writings on various alchemical subjects. Now, he's not writing about alchemy per se, and he's not really interested in studying the history of alchemy or the history of science. He's mining alchemy for his own purposes, which are psychological. He's looking at the writings of the alchemists for hints of psychological insight that he will be able to connect to from his own experience and his own theoretical position, and use for amplifying the individuation process, basically. And so he began this work, Mysterium Conjunctionis, with that in mind, to discuss how it can happen that the psyche can be unified, and the psyche can be brought to a position of individuation in the sense of being deeply related in all of its parts, not divided, but undivided, through a process of separation and analysis on the one hand, and integration and consolidation on the other hand.